Ways to get started. First, we're going to do some generation exercises in an upcoming video. But second, if you're working on it on your own, here are a couple of tried and true techniques for getting started. Sit down in front of one of your works, or several, and simply describe what you see. And then give it a little while and describe how you feel. And then describe what you want me to do after I see your work. How should I be changed? The idea here is that you do it not sitting at a desk staring at a computer screen, but you actually get in front of your work, and it's so much easier to respond to why you were doing it, what was important about the execution, how you arrived at these images. Similarly, you can look over an extended period of essentially your own mini retrospective. Look over an extended period of images and look for themes, major changes, ideas that you keep coming back to. If you've got an artistic hero, you don't necessarily want to name them because obviously they will come off looking better than you. But you can think about the way in which they put their work into context, and that gives you an opportunity to explain that though you come from a tradition or are looking at other artists, your idea is unique in whatever ways that you can describe. And if you can't write it yourself and you can't steal somebody else's idea, then make somebody else do the work for you. Have somebody else describe your work. Collect their written reactions, so ask them to write down how they would describe your work, and then collate those and see if they are getting close to what your intention was. How can you borrow some of those phrases? It's not plagiarism if they say you can. This is actually a big part of what we're doing in the studio visits, so we're kind of crowdsourcing our artist statements. Generally, make sure that you cover what kind of work do you make. Go ahead and say the word pottery or whatever it is that you do. What does your work say? What is the intention? What is the content that you're hoping to get across? And at least have in mind who your intended audience is, not just for the work, but for that specific statement. You're going to say different things when you're applying for a grant than when you are applying for grad school. Make sure that you talk about both form and content. With form, you want to say what it is that you do. Go ahead and name your media, your techniques, and your tools. But also remember to describe what it looks like. What are the visual sensations you're going for? Are you creating large-scale or intimate pieces? And notice the way in which as soon as I say intimate, we're not only talking about size, but we're talking about content at the same time. So in the content, make sure that you are discussing why it is that you made this work. Subject matter might be trees, but your content could be any number of things. It could be about deforestation. It could be about stoicism in the face of a changing world. It could be about your fondness for climbing trees or something. I don't know. Make sure that you're also explaining why it needed to be art. I worked with a guy named Ron Christ who often would catch students saying that their work was about, and then they'd say just a big broad category, and they wouldn't necessarily follow up with why or how, and just as important, they wouldn't explain why it needed to be art. I remember specifically there was one guy who said his work was about racism, and Ron piped up with a perfectly logical question: are you for it or against it? Well, I'm against racism. Okay, so why are we making art instead of working in politics? And it's not that you can't make work that's about racism and succeeds as visual art. It's that you need to know why it should be visual art as opposed to a voter registration drive. If you get stuck, try these. You can record a conversation with you and another artist or a friend who is willing to let you just talk. Sometimes it's easier for us to say things out loud than it is for us to type them, and then we can go back and listen to that conversation and pull out the good phrases. Another idea is to sit in front of the work and just write and not censor yourself or even try to organize it into coherent sentences, and then come back later with different colored highlighters. And every time you're talking about form, you can highlight that in pink. And every time you're talking about content, you can highlight that in green. And every time you're talking about process, you can highlight that in, I guess we're up to blue. You can also unpack a specific piece. So get really focused, describe one specific piece, and then repeat for a couple of others and see what shows up every time. If you're always talking about color, or if you're always talking about material, then that seems like it's something that's important to the work. If thematic and content imagery is driving your discussion, then that could be the thing that you need to talk about. You can also take your shorter statement and then basically ask why and how at the end of every phrase. So unpack the phrase. I make paintings. Okay, why? I make pottery. Okay, how? Do you do it on the wheel? Do you do it with coil building? Are you throwing everything up in the air and seeing what sticks? Look especially for hidden assumptions, those things where your brain is moving through your motivation so fast that you didn't stop and actually explain what it was that was interesting about working very large or very loud or very spiky. And when all else fails, look at your sketchbook. You probably wrote yourself a note at some point explaining or reminding what you were hoping to do in a piece. Steal that phrase and expand it. Especially in a post-internet age, shorter is better than longer. If you have a 16-page manifesto, I am unlikely to finish reading it. Shorter and wanting to know more, or brief that gets me to look at the work again, is probably better. Usually, if you find that there's repetition in your work, it's because you haven't quite figured out how you want to say or communicate some aspect of the work. Try combining them and having one clear sentence that explains that topic. Don't talk too much about other artists. Yes, it's possible for you to put your name in contention with the greats of art history, but often we're going to lose that comparison. So make it about your work, not about your reaction to others. Don't use the word intuitive as a way to get out of explaining your intention. Intuitive just means that you were making decisions so fast that you didn't have to stop and consider each one, but it doesn't mean that you didn't make decisions. While it is appropriate for some artists to discuss how they grew up or their background as part of the motivation for the work, make sure that you're not trying to use your biography as a shield to protect you from criticism. Also, don't be a wuss. Don't use words like, it's my hope to, if my work could, I'd like to attempt to maybe kind of think about possibly doing this thing that maybe would be okay with you. This gets tricky because there are some people who disagree and don't want to be told how to read the work. But I think it's always better for you to go ahead and make a statement. All that said, don't get too much in your head. Just write a statement. We'll work on it over the course of the semester.